Hey guys, Cabin NES Fever here. Previously Cabin NES Fever, which is kind of what we're here to talk about today. I felt like it was time to perhaps show my face and talk a little bit about me and talk a little bit about, what I'm doing and what my channel's about. You've all known me previously as being someone who, has beaten games and given you, written reviews and clips of and playthroughs now of me beating those games. But I want to take it to a bit more personal level and kind of talk to you a little bit about myself, talk to you a little bit about, what collecting is to me, my collection, my history with games. And so all that kind of stuff is gonna come up in the future. I'm going to show you some videos of my collection. I'm going to show you some videos of why I got into collecting and the things that my history with gaming. But I also wanted to do a little series talking a bit more in depth about the games I've actually beaten, because I thought that might be interesting to certain people who want perhaps a little bit more than just the reviews I've written, or maybe don't have time to go back and read all the reviews that I've done for games I've beaten, and maybe this is a bit more accessible to them. So we're going to start things off by talking about the NES, which is where my Instagram journey kind of began. And for anyone who doesn't know, last year from probably around June 2020 through to around March, April 2021, I, for charity, decided to beat every NES game that I own, which is the full UK library of 234 games, using just the original games. No cheats, no walkthroughs, no how-to guides, just kind of like me and the games, and live streaming it on Instagram. And that's where I've met a lot of great people, and we all raised all over £1,000 in the end for Mental Health UK, which is far surpassed what I expected, and just shows the kind of wealth and awesomeness of this community. So yeah, here's a video where we're going to just kind of go through all the games that I've beaten, kind of one by one, give you a bit of review in a bit more of a personal touch perhaps than my written reviews. It's going to take some time. I think we'll probably be looking at quite a few episodes. I'll probably go through, I guess, letter by letter, and yeah, hopefully we'll see it through to the end. If you guys like it, let me know, and maybe we can do some more of these. But okay, let's get on with things. So starting things off, 10-Yard Fight, one of the launch titles of the system, essentially American football. And American football is becoming quite a big deal over here in the UK nowadays. I think, there's a lot of football stadiums, or I call football, which is of course what you might know in America as soccer. There's a lot of big stadiums in the UK now who are starting to host NFL games to kind of build publicity for the sport. I think it's getting more popular, but this is in the 80s. This is an odd choice to put out here, because NFL wasn't a big deal, and I didn't really think American football was a big thing. And considering some of the launch titles that didn't get released here, like Slalom, I'm sure there's some others, but off the top of my head, Slalom, I mean, skiing was a much bigger deal, especially in the 80s, than American football. So strange choice. In terms of beating it, this is a very simple game, like many of the launch titles, and it does give you a kind of, unlike some of them, it's not just a kind of arcade experience with just an endless stream of levels that go on forever. This one does actually have the opportunity to kind of beat opponents, like difficulty skill opponents. I think you can choose a skill level. I think you can choose a skill level from college, professional, and eventually it's only a one match thing, but once you've beaten them, it says you're on your way to the Super Bowl. There is no Super Bowl game. It is just the one match. You choose your difficulty opponent and you beat them. Very simple. It plays okay considering what it is. It's not a full lineup of players. I think you get like sort of half a team, but there's a few different plays you can do. It's a little bit more technical than you might think when you first play it, and it's quite fun. And I think is it 2-player? I can't even remember if it's 2-player now. Yeah, it is. It's 2-player, so you could play against someone else, and I could see that being a bit of a challenge and a bit of fun. Anyway, A very easy game. If you want to beat that one, it's not gonna take you long. Next up is A Boy and His Blob. This is a game that I had as a kid. Well, actually, I didn't own it, but I rented it, and it blew me away a little bit. It's like I really love this game in many respects. I just think that it's very flawed. Unfortunately, it's flawed. Technically, there are bugs in there, and some of the, much like a lot of the early games, some of the sort of emphasis that it puts on discovery is too much. Like, it really puts a hell of a lot of pressure on the player to find their way through the game without really giving you enough clues. So there's a heck of a lot of trial and error. But you know, that's the era of where these games came from, and I think this is one of the better examples. If you're after a kind of fun adventure game that has got lots of charm, then you can't go wrong with The Boy and His Blob. And the variety in the different things that Blob can do. Basically, the premise is boy gives him jelly beans, he turns into other things. It's a bit weird, but there's a lot of things that you can do, and finding what the different things that Blob can do is fun. You know, it is fun. But yeah, it's also just absolutely hell of a trial and error. And I think you only get 3 lives. So, you know, a game over, back to the beginning, start again. I mean, it's a game really that a modern walkthrough kind of would benefit from. And I can imagine most players nowadays wanting to play this would kind of be turning to a walkthrough to beat it. My own personal experiences with it in the past gave me a bit of a heads up, but it still took a lot of trial and error to beat this without a walkthrough, like a lot. But I still enjoyed it, and despite its flaws, I think it's great. Recently remade for the Wii. Well, no, maybe not recently, probably about 10 years ago, remade for the Wii. I haven't got around to playing it yet. I've heard that it is the version that we perhaps should have got on NES. So time will tell with that. Next up is Action New York. This game, renamed Action New York over here from its alternative name in the US, which was Scat. Now, I don't know about you, but I can kind of understand why maybe changing the name from Scat to Action New York helped it sell a bit better over here. I'm not going to go into details of why. You either understand what I'm saying or you don't need to know. Anyway, Action New York, or Scat, do you know what? It's a really, really good shooter. It's a really cool shooter. Like, there aren't many good shooters on the NES. There aren't really that many good 8-bit shooters. In my opinion, I think that we really kind of hit the ground when it got to 16-bit. But there are still some really good 8-bit ones, and this is a good example of one. Like, really interesting weapon power-ups. Not a huge amount, but enough to keep it interesting throughout. And I think that the thing that got me the most was you can choose your angle of fire based on the option upgrades that you pick up, and you can freeze them in different angles to fire in different ways. It's just quite innovative for an NES controller that only has, well, essentially 2 buttons and start and select. So I guess 4 buttons. It's innovative to give you that much control, and it was much appreciated. I think there are infinite continues. It's a hard game. It's NES. It's hard. You know, like, it's hard, but in terms of NES, what makes it less hard is the fact that there are infinite continues. So you just keep slogging at it. You know, there's no password, unfortunately, but you just keep slogging at it. If you're playing nowadays with emulator, then you can just save state rather than, you know, using a password. I'm not saying cheat with save states, but, you know, get a game over, save state, come back to it the next day, carry on from that level. I think that's justifiable these days. For me, this was it wasn't a whole day. It was an afternoon, 3 or 4 hours of slogging at it. But yeah, I really liked it. Great game. Next up is the Addams Family. The only Addams Family game released over here. I think there might have been a few more in the NTSC region, but this one is poor. It's Ocean. Ocean are a very hit and miss company, releasing in the UK on the NES. I think the home computer scene, Ocean, huge name, but on the NES, it's definitely hit and miss, and this is an example of a miss. And what's kind of a shame is that it's kind of like under the surface there's a good game to be played. It's a kind of puzzle platform and sort of like kind of like an adventure. It mixes genres and it works to a degree, but the oh gosh, the design choices are poor. It screams of being rushed. It's that kind of awfulness where you jump and you'll clip through walls and you fall through platforms unless you're sort of dead center. It has an awkward jump mechanic. It's let down horribly by controls. It's clunky. It's a mess. But the premise is nice. There's no time limit. It's just one big level to explore. You need to find certain things before you can go. It's not that long a game, but its difficulty comes almost exclusively from the poor control. I think there's a section where you are in a chiller section, an ice level essentially, where the controls, oh dear. I think Fester's face on there just says it all. I mean, that is my expression for most of the game. Anywho, moving on. Bit of a firm favourite in the fan group. For those who were supporting me throughout the last year, this became a bit of a go-to title to have a laugh at. Adventures of Biobilly. Now, Konami are, to me, I just love Konami. They are my favourite retro programmer, producer of games, and it's a kind of a shame that where they are now would essentially just Metal Gear Solid and ISS Pro, but back in the day they were pushing out games all over the place, and they just have hit after hit after hit, and we will see and talk about many of those hits. This is definitely not one of them. At least it isn't to me. It's not a terrible game based on some of the other terrible games that the NES had, but it's a terrible game for Konami. I think that there are many other examples out there of how you could do a game like this better, and yeah, it suffers for it, and it's mainly because of the beat 'em up, which is essentially what this game is. It's a beat 'em up, but the beat 'em up stages are just dull. Your character, who's essentially Crocodile Dundee, is sluggish, controls poorly. When you play things like Double Dragon, which in itself is kind of sluggish to a degree, but the variety of moves that you have in a game like Double Dragon, and certainly like River Street Ransom, or and some of the other beat 'em ups too. To play this, which came out when are we looking, 1990, so it's quite early, to be honest. It's not that late, but nonetheless, preceding it had been better beat 'em ups. So it's kind of a shame that the beat 'em up sections are sluggish. There's driving sections as well, which are, it's NES driving, it's third person. There's a lot of like scrolling fake parallax backgrounds moving, and it's hard on the eye and hard to control, hard to even know where hazards are coming from. And that's also followed up with some light gun stages. Now the light gun stages are probably the more enjoyable, and it's also why this game is kind of unplayable perhaps for people nowadays if you don't have a light gun, because trying to play light gun stages on emulation is going to be hard work. So, and I think in those light gun stages you get continues, if I remember. I do remember shooting quite a few continues and lives in those light gun levels. So yeah, I think that it might be hard to beat it now, unless you're playing the original game on a CRT. But yeah, I mean, there are worse games out there. We all like to have a laugh about this in my stream group, and I think that's justifiable. But yeah, it's not the worst game out there. There are worse games. Okay, Adventure Island Classics, which translates essentially just Adventure Island. I don't know why they had to call it Classic over here, because it is just Adventure Island. This is a game that's very fondly remembered by many people who remember the NES. But yeah, I've never liked it. I'm just going to go out and say it. I've never liked this game. I don't like the concept of it. The idea of collecting fruit to reduce your timer it's actually a life bar, but essentially your life bar is a timer that's constantly running down. If it gets to zero or zero of your life, you die. You replenish it by collecting fruit, and yeah, that's it. You're kind of rushing through a level. The screen is always scrolling against you. It's an arcade experience. It's a novel idea, but I just don't like it. I never have, and coming to have to beat it was easily one of the hard. Well, it's easily up there as one of the harder games. I mean, I think out of the first 100 games, it would have been a 10 out of 10. But as the games went on, I think it got downgraded to a 9. I think I gave it a 9 out of 10 for difficulty in the end. And to some people who have beaten this game and who have a lot of childhood experience with it, they might hear me call it a 9 or a 10 and just think, what are you talking about? It's it's an easy game. But any game's an easy game once you know how. That's the thing. Well, to an extent, most games are an easy game once you know how to beat them. But I didn't know how to beat this, and I had to do it the hard way. I didn't know where a lot of the hidden power-ups were, and so yeah, I suffered a lot doing that. I also learnt about the continue aspect of the game, which is just bizarre. You have to find a hidden item in a certain level near the beginning, and that gives you the ability to continue the game after a game over from then on. But to do so, you have to, I can't remember exactly. I think you have to like either hold select and press start or hold right and press start. I can't remember, but it's the sort of situation where you get your game over screen, you go to the title screen, you have to then hold, I don't know, like left and start or something to then get the continue. And that's all well and fine when you're dying every 10 minutes or 5 minutes and you're back to that title screen. You can remember to do it. But when you're in like world 8, which is I think the final world, and you are dying, and it is brutally hard in the last world. I mean, brutally hard, and there's such long levels as well, and you're dying all the time. Having to remember to press that combination of buttons every single time you get game over, it's inevitable that you're going to screw it up at some point. And once you screw it up and you hit continue, or start, whatever it is, without holding right, you start right from the beginning again. There's no going back. And can you imagine how frustrating that is for a game where you have spent 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours getting to the final world, only to have to start at the beginning? It happened to me twice when I was playing through it. Twice I got to world 8 and did that. So yeah, this game to me is hell. It was hell. Thankfully the bosses are easy. So yeah, it was, thankfully when I got to that final boss, it wasn't too bad. The sequel, Adventure Island 2, it's a better game, but it's not. It doesn't really change any of the dynamics that I didn't like about the first game. It's essentially the same. It's a much bigger game this time. You have, I think, 8 islands rather than just 8 worlds. The previous game had worlds where I think there was 3 stages to each world, or no, 4 stages to each world. Now you have 8 islands, and each island can have 10, 15 levels. You don't have to play them all, but you will end up playing a lot of them. But thankfully, the levels are shorter. So in hindsight, it is an easier game. You also get the dinosaur power-ups, which definitely elevate the gameplay, make it more fun. But yeah, the difficulty's still there. And this time they did at least give you a continue feature as standard, thank God. But they just couldn't resist adding a stupid feature where I think, again, you have to find an item early on in the game which allows you to hold on to your items when you get a game over. So in this game, you can actually stockpile dinosaurs and keep them in a menu, a separate menu. A bit like Super Mario World, when you're on the map screen, you can kind of choose special items that you've stockpiled. Well, this game does the same thing, except in this game, in order to do that with a game over, you have to, again, press a combination of buttons. Which if you don't do that and you just hit continue, you start from the island you were on, but without your items. So again, it's inevitable. As you get later on in the game, you're going to mess it up eventually. I messed it up eventually, so I lost all my dinosaurs, which meant that I made it onto the final island with no power-ups, and there aren't many power-ups on offer in the final island. So I just had to struggle through that final island. and I think it took me, I think the whole getting to the final island took me a couple of hours, but that final island took probably, I don't even know, 3-4 hours on its own. Each time you die on the boss, each island has a boss. If you die on the boss, the boss moves into a different place on the island, so you have to do more levels to get back to him, which, you know, with your life count, you know, is inevitably going to end up with the game over and you have to start from the beginning of the island again. Yeah, it's not my favourite. Again, if anyone remembers the end clip of me beating that, you probably can hear in my voice how delighted I was to beat that. Which, by the way, I should say, if anyone wants to hear my real proper reviews that I spent a lot of time on and gives my real thoughts on each game, as well as seeing the end clips of me beating them all, just scroll back through my my Instagram not stories, my posts, and you can see any game and my thoughts on all of them. Next up is Adventures in the Magic Kingdom, one of Disney and Capcom's collaborations. I mean, this game is, for all intents and purposes, a advert for Disney World, Florida, and yeah, I mean, it's shameless. It's shameless. It literally is a kids RPG, very small, beginner level RPG, where you go into the Magic Kingdom, the actual Disney World, and it is Disney World, and you travel around Disney World helping Mickey find some keys from doing various mini games, and that's it. The mini games are pretty easy, pretty basic, or very easy actually for a lot of it. And I think there's 1 or 2 action stages, which save the game from being an absolute car crash to being something that's, yeah, it's enjoyable. It's something for a younger audience, clearly, and some of the action stages offer a little bit of challenge, to be honest with you, but not a lot. And it's a casual evening play, and it was nice to have that kind of casual play occasionally given to me. So I enjoyed playing it. I enjoyed beating it. Next up is a game that was, again, in many ways slightly casual, in other ways extremely frustrating. But yeah, Adventures of Lolo 2. I'm just flipping these round, by the way, because a lot of the time I didn't actually do this when I started, but I like to have the catch here at the back, so at the front you can actually see it. Anyway, that's a collector OCD thing there. Adventures of Lolo 2. This was the only Lolo game released in the UK. There was 3 of them altogether. We didn't get the first one. We didn't get the third one. I don't know why, because well, I guess it wasn't a success, which is bizarre because this is a great puzzle game. This is a great puzzle game, and I think it's a real shame that we didn't get the third one. But it's hard. It's hard because it's actually hard for all the right reasons with an NES game. The difficulty in the puzzles is what makes it hard, because you're given a password for every level, which is exactly, and you know, that is all I ask for with a puzzle game, is a password for every level. I cannot, and there are some games that we'll come to later, I cannot, you know, just explain how annoying it is to play a puzzle game where you don't get a password for every level, especially when they're difficult puzzles games, because it's all well and good knowing the puzzle, but a lot of the difficulty from puzzle games comes from actually repeating very precise timed inputs repeatedly. So, you know, just because you know what to do doesn't mean you can necessarily do it every time. And yeah, that's no different in this one, but you get a password for every level, so that makes it much more bearable. And yeah, it's great. I mean, I can't speak highly of it enough. If you like puzzle games, this is one of the best, so stick at it. It's a long game though, and it's hard, so be prepared for yeah, a fair old challenge. Okay, Airwolf. This was, I think, the first title on the list that I've given a 10 out of 10 difficulty rating for. I don't like flight sims anyway. I like shooters, but I don't like flight simulators, and this is a flight simulator that is, well, it's a helicopter simulator based on the TV series, and it is everything I hate about those flight sims. Essentially, it's, I don't know, it like where do I even start? It controls badly. It's just so unfair. The biggest problem with it is it's so unfair. You cannot avoid incoming fire. When you're going along, things will hit you from the sides. You can't maneuver out of the way of them. When you do maneuver out of the way, you go so far off course that by the time you've corrected yourself, you're just taking more damage. And the thing is that this game is so demanding on your, I think is there a time limit or fuel limit? I can't even remember, but you basically have to plan your route perfectly on each level to get from point to point, to pick up your hostages, and get to, it is fuel, to get to your fuel refueling stations and things like that, and energy or repair places, because you take so much damage going from one place to another that unless you have planned the absolute perfect route from one stage from one bit to the next bit, you're not going to survive. And to beat the game, you need to finish 20 levels in a row. You do have a few lives. You can get a couple more lives, I think, as the game goes on, but you can easily miss them. You get one opportunity to shoot down this kind of orange aircraft, and if you don't, you missed your extra life chance. 20 levels, brutal game to beat. Had me constantly screaming and shouting, and don't want to ever play it again. Okay, next up, Alfred Chicken. This is a platformer where you play as a chicken who it's a weird one. I don't even know the story. Is it based on a cartoon? It feels like it has to be based on a cartoon, because for something that's this original, it seems bizarre to me that a game designer, it feels like it's a wasted concept if it's a totally original game, is what I'm saying, because it's so bizarre, so fantastic. I feel like it belongs in a TV series or a cartoon. But I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of it because I don't really remember the story. But you're playing as a chicken and you're trying to stop some sort of mecha chickens or something like that. It's quite short. There's only 5 levels, I think, and if I remember correctly. And there's an element of puzzle to each level. There's a bit of a collectathon aspect to each level. Some things you don't have to collect all of, other things you do. I think you have to pop every balloon to get the exit, and there's quite a few hidden things to find and pet bonuses. It's fun. It plays well, and it's quite rewarding. It came out also on Super Nintendo. It's not a game I have, so I don't know. I might have come out on Mega Drive as well, actually. I don't know. But this is the 8-bit version, and this is 93. 93. So quite late on. So I think the NES port was a bit of an afterthought, really. And for that matter, maybe it belongs on 16-bit to give it a fair judgment, but it's still good. It's still good. It's still playable, and I think it's relatively cheap. So why not? Quite easy to beat, to be honest with you. I think you get a password for every level, which definitely makes it easier. Right, Alien 3. We are heading into territory that, some people probably remember. Some people probably feel quite angry when I hold up this game. There's a certain company logo down there, LJN, which I think very often angers people. However, this was made by Probe, I believe, who did all the Alien 3 versions. This is essentially the NES version of the Mega Drive game, because this Alien 3 is whatever deal that 20th Century Fox made. They pumped out games across all the consoles, and they're all quite different. Like the SNES one is very, very different to the Mega Drive one. This one is much more familiar, ironically, to the Mega Drive one than it is to the SNES one. It's nothing like the SNES one. And it's really impressive, to be honest with you. Like, it really does a good job of bringing the atmosphere of the movie to life, and it's quite dark, it's quite sinister. It feels honest, it feels good. It includes all the aliens. It's got most of it. I don't think it has the smart gun, but it's got all the other guns. It's good. The downside to it, and what I think most people hate about it, is the time limit on each level is such a handicap. I mean, I there's a lot of levels. What's nice is that very rare for the NES, on the options menu you can choose your life count, and I think you even choose your continue count. So you can give yourself a lot, and you need a lot because you need to really grind these levels until you know them. I even had to draw maps for certain levels, and even on levels that I knew, even on levels that I kind of knew what I needed to do at the beginning of the level, and I thought, right, we're going to just scroll through this and we're going to get through it. And if you make one mistake, certainly two mistakes, that could be enough to just fail the level. You slip off a platform and you drop down a chasm. By the time you jumped up to the top of that chasm, it could be too late. You're not going to have enough time to save everyone and find the exit, because that's the premise of each level: is find all the civilians before the aliens hatch, and then also find the exit. Your job's not done when you found all the civilians. You then have to find the exit. So yeah, it's hard work. It's a hard game to beat for that reason, but otherwise it's really good. So yeah, it's a shame. It's kind of a shame it's let down in that way. Right, final game for the letter A, I believe. Yeah, we're going to look at Asterix. Asterix is a series. If you're not familiar, in America, it was a French cartoon series, which a cartoon in comic book form, should I say, not in TV form, although they were converted to TV as well. But yeah, a comic book strip which was a big hit in France, and it became a big hit over here too, as well as other parts of Europe. And yeah, you play a French resistance Roman. A French resistance villager called Asterix, who's resistance against the Romans Empire. One of the only surviving villagers in early European times from the Roman conquest. He's the kind of, he's the leader of the village. No, he's not the leader, but he's the kind of warrior of that village. And in this game, he's out to try and save his friend Obelix. It's a platformer. It's one that was released on Super Nintendo as well. I've also got the Super Nintendo version, and I assumed that the NES version was going to be a cut down and fairly inferior version of the 16-bit game. But it's not the case. Having played both of them, I can tell you that this is the better game, at least in my opinion. I think it controls better. I think it responds better. I think it doesn't look as nice, obviously, but for where it looks okay, it looks perfectly serviceable, and for what it lacks in looks, it definitely makes up for in control. And so, if you ever want to play it, I would say play this version. It's not that long. I think it's 6 levels. You possibly even have, I think you do have an option to choose difficulty, which is again rare for the NES, and I think maybe that might determine how many levels there are rather than anything else. I can't quite remember. I think I beat it on normal, but yeah, I mean it's not that difficult. There can be quite a lot of extra lives awarded if you play well. And yeah, I mean, there's a couple of tricky platforming sections, but it's probably something that your average gamer can beat with 4, maybe 5 playthroughs. I reckon you'll beat it. And that brings us to the end of the letter A. So we'll come back and do the letter B another time. Hope you enjoyed.